Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey T. Tiller back with another Service Management Leadership podcast, but it's been replaced, as you know, for the last few weeks with the Global ITAM Summit Year 2. And today's podcast, is a breakout session with somebody that I want you to get to know better named Piers MacDonnell. Piers is an IBM software licensing expert. Piers, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for that introduction, Jeffrey.
Oh, I'm ready to get going on this. So you've been in this space a long time. You have a lot of experience in the IBM licensing world, and probably some other software publishers as well. What are the types of pain points your customers are experiencing, and how are you advising them to navigate those pain points?
I suppose in the IBM world, you're always talking about the data center and I guess what I would call the enterprise software. So straight away, the table stakes are quite high. You're talking about most organizations spending several $1 million on their investment year on year, and indeed even on new purchases. So you're talking about the sheer size and scale of your problem is probably the first thing you have to think about. Right now, the kind of things we're saying that organizations are just a couple of things they're looking at. First of all, many of them will be looking at renewing their enterprise agreements, and that is a significant 3 to 5 year experience. And what's happening there is many of, I guess we'll probably bring up the COVID question again, but many of them got a 1 year, I guess, sabbatical or extension from IBM. Those are all now beginning to come through, and they will have to make those hard decisions and those hard budget decisions. And what we'll be advising there really is preparation to put in to set up the project, to figure out what you have, what you want going forward. And this is not always fully thought through. You may find that they say, oh, we'll just do the same as before. But as we all know, the both the commercial environment and the IT environment has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
And so they need to really think about their future state, what they want to do. And then, of course, the part of that preparation is how do we get it? And this is really working through in terms of the negotiation preparation. So I'd be saying, advising those ELAs and enterprise agreements, the SOs and so forth, you've got to postpone them for a while, but that's a short-term fix here. They've now come around. So that'd be the early one. The second area I'd be kind of saying is, again, there was a bit of a reprieve with regard to the audits. And those are now very much coming back since the beginning of this year. There was a degree of you could postpone it due to extraordinary circumstances. And in certain circumstances, particularly the healthcare, you might still be able to achieve that, but not in the rest of industry. So they will have to be ready for the audit. In simple terms, if you have not received a review in the last 3 to 4 years, expect one now and start preparing and find out if you do have problems to sort them out quite quickly and take the time now rather than when the letter arrives. Um, the last area that I'm seeing, and this was, I guess, this is part of the acceleration that's been occurring anyway with regard to just IT and working from home and digital transformation. Um, as has been happening with anyone that's working from home, no more than ourselves right now, dramatic changes in the IT landscape. So what this means is digital transformation within all organizations has accelerated dramatically. And that has a significant impact on licensing and on even future strategy, even on the products you're purchasing. And this needs to be planned into right now. Where there was, again, people were saying, oh, we'll deal with that in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll work towards it. That has come very quickly forward. And they need to ask those questions. Not what our cloud strategy is what next are we doing with cloud strategy? It's here. And IBM is only one of many vendors. Um, and the last area I think is going to be SaaS and or the very much the subscription-based licensing. Um, IBM has been a bit later to the game than most. They're here, and if anyone who's been watching the old co new co conversation going on with regard to the breakup of IBM, this is very much where this is going. There is going to be subscription is the new license model going forward. You can see it in the condition changes on new products. You can see it in the offerings with regard to the different product offerings where you have dual licensing. You can also see many of the benefits being subtly eroded with regard to perpetual licenses. As you upgrade, you're suddenly finding it harder and less free stuff and less what we used to call bundling is occurring, or the conditions around it are very much geared to saying this product is probably going to be running in the cloud. Therefore, a whole new set of rules apply. So they're I guess, a broad stroke of what I'm seeing.
So what I heard you say, if I can summarize, is prepare, because the first two,
Yes.
when you have your renewals and so you're talking renewals in the millions. And so being
Always.
able to say 5% is a big number, 3% is a big number. And even on the audit, I haven't seen very many audits for IBM that were less than 100,000 US dollars. Most of the audit findings and to make reparations, those are big numbers. And
Yes.
so prepare on those.
Yes, and also I think what's happened was there was this lull in both audit activity, in ELA negotiations, and indeed other activity within projects. This lull is now gone. Certain from the turn of this year, you can see a dramatic increase, and most organizations are very anxious to get to business.
Right.
But that also means that IBM will want to sell their products and will return to their normal activity levels. And as I said, the key word, I guess my word of the day here is preparation. And the stakes are high, so therefore it should be taken seriously.
And that's also why they need help, right? I mean, if millions of
Yes,
dollars are at stake.
it is indeed. And look, whether it's from someone like me or the company I work for, or the elsewhere, you need help, specific in particular for those one-off complex events. Like you have these once in 3 year type EA renewal, ELAs, and audits. You should get help, because if you thought it was complicated before, it has gotten, first of all, the licensing of the current licensing set is already complex, but the future state where things are going is also brand new, and different licensing rules, different even strategies with regard to the products and services that the organizations will be consuming. And you do need help to at least understand, be ready to be confident in your negotiations, and ultimately to make informed decisions.
Oh, yes. And there's a positive ROI,
Oh yes.
or the consulting side wouldn't have a leg. The one thing you said earlier that I wanted to touch on, and before we move on, is you talked about the role of understanding your software position and the implications when you have transformation. I am of the belief every time you bring new functionality, your software people, internal, your SAM, software asset management people, should have a seat at the table. Every time you add new functionality, you're probably removing something else. It's going to disrupt some of your agreements, or at least alter them. And you need to understand those implications as part of the finance decision up front versus having to deal with it when IBM or whomever comes knocking.
You're quite right. What I'll be saying there is, anytime you change something in a data center, there is always a significant license impact, whichever vendor it is. It just happens to be that in the IBM world, because their software is so much more expensive, and even small changes like the movement from one server to another can have a dramatic impact, that you do need to measure that. So in simple terms, SAM must be there for any change within the data center and within software licensing, because the risks of getting it wrong are too high.
Right.
And these are production systems. It is very difficult to roll back a mistake a year later if you find it. So you need to be trying to get ahead of that and preempt the problem, really.
Oh, yes. And even the moving to a SaaS or a cloud solution for IBM may impact your Oracle license because it sets on an Oracle database in your data center. I mean, there's so many just trickle down effect that you have to, as an organization, have your arms around your environment pretty well, I think.
You do. And I guess in the IBM world as well, there is an extra complexity, because even just upgrading versions, not even changing the server on which you're deploying, can dramatically change the licensing. because products, you're on an older version, products that you receive for free, essentially bundled in or were subcomponents of it, are a change. So you might find that what you were compliant before the upgrade, same server, same cores, same PVUs, you're not compliant after the upgrade because some of the components or products are no longer available, or the rules have changed around it. And this gets back to a point I was saying about the push to the cloud, that that many of the free or benefits that you received, not benefits, the additional, I guess, licenses you received historically are being eroded. So if you look at the license conditions now, more and more you'll see conditions, that particular section within license information for many years was left blank or would have one line in it, now has quite significant section on restrictions around that particular product. It'll talk about things if you distribute it across multiple servers, if it's in a cloud environment, there's certain minimums now required, things that were never there before. And IBM is very much saying to you, we want you going a different way. And as you upgrade and move along, we're nudging you that way.
Yes, where the other organizations, other publishers incentivize, IBM's giving you a push in the back and saying you're
They do
coming, you're going.
incentivize now. It's both a carrot and a stick here. Their dual licensing is quite good, and you know, if you want to do a cloud deal, they have some very good ones. Also, I do like, I'll be honest with you, their flexibility around platforms. You know, you're seeing not just the IBM platforms, when you can run your IBM products, so long as you have the correct monitoring on Azure and on obviously and all the other Amazon Web Services. So they are progressive in that regard. But unlike one of the other vendors you just mentioned, but be very, very careful about the licensing. It changes, and it can change very significantly when you move from potentially either an in-house private cloud to one of the more public clouds.
And it's all complex. I mean, the bottom line, it's complex, and you will need help to navigate. And so,
exactly,
if you peer into your crystal ball and
mm-hmm.
you think, what are some of the changes coming in the next 2 or 3 years for IBM licensing? You mentioned the push to the cloud, you know,
Mm-hmm.
let's move in that way. But what are some of the other changes coming on the horizon?
I suppose the first one that kind of comes to mind is subscription. So the move, like, there's nothing new about this. It's just the acceleration is different. You're not, less and less products are going to be available to you on a subscription basis, or sorry, on an S&S perpetual basis. It's going to be subscription, and it's just in the IBM case, they're a little slower getting to the party. They're here and they're structuring themselves accordingly. Along with that, there was an interesting area that I was just discussing with a colleague with mine recently, and this is the whole area of just SaaS optimization and also SaaS compliance. It's something we've been aware of with other vendors such as the likes of ServiceNow and Salesforce over the years, because they've been longer in the SaaS position. But you're going to find that compliance and particularly optimization, because these are OPEXs now,
yes,
is going to be a whole huge industry. It's where consultants like myself have to be watching, and I see that across the board. And the people who are running IBM products are going to have to get up to speed on this and understand there's a significant change in the financing model. It is no longer capex where you spent the million and you kind of just paid your S&S. It is now every year there's an opex, there's going to be a commit, and you need to be managing that because it's significant money. I see a fascinating problem of forming with regard to the new technologies around AI and the transactional based BI, AI, because the license metrics around these are not defined. How do you account for the fact that if have an AI product from, you know, Big Blue, that whose IP is what? You know, if I'm training this engine, despite the fact that I'm using it, who owns this intelligence that I'm building? Again, I had this conversation some time ago with a colleague in the pharma industry, pharmaceuticals, and they were quite, I suppose, put out by the fact that, hang on a minute, this is our intelligence of our operators, our systems teaching IBM. Where's our IBM's AI systems? Where's our return on this? So it was quite an interesting one. And of course, the transactional models as well is going to be becoming a fascinating space from a compliance, from a licensing, IP. It's going to get interesting, is all I can say. And I suppose the other areas then is going to be, I guess, the whole the transactional model, the Kubernetes, the where you're going to be licensing on fractions of CPUs, where you might be spinning up 10,000 instances of an application on a machine to do a transaction, and then they disappear. How do you fairly license that? It becomes IBM have put it out there. They said you use our tool or you're not compliant, but or you must be fully compliant. But it's not so black and white. And the last one, of course, for me is the whole new set of tools have just been let into the market. So long as you're in an ISP, you now have historically, you only had BigFix and Flexera and ILMT. Now, under certain conditions, you have Snow, ServiceNow, Citrino. There's a whole how do you say plethora of collection of new tools being introduced, and this becomes interesting where organizations have already made the investment in some of these tools, and they go, "Hang on a minute, maybe we should be leveraging this further." So there's lots happening.
There is, and the one thing that I would add that underpinned all that you said is the rate of change is picking up. You know,
Yes.
the speed is picking up, and so whatever took us 5 years in the past may only take us 1 year in the future in terms of the rate of change.
It is, and it's probably a last point. It's I guess it's more general than specific to IBM. I do think that the SAM as a managed service is going to come of age, not out of a huge desire from organizations, but the sheer complexity is forcing them. And I compare this to when accounting, 30 years ago was all done on maybe someone's PC in an office. Now you wouldn't think of it except in the most unusual sort of, it's all outsourced to the experts who are used to managing these things and who can do it more efficiently for you. And that has been emerging slowly. I see rapid acceleration, not even within just for IBM, but across the board, because keeping on top of these complexities, and when the stakes are so high, outsourcing becomes a no-brainer in many cases.
I agree, especially organizations that decide, hey, this isn't our expertise. This isn't what we do for a living. We don't want to keep pouring resources into something we don't do as a core service offering for our customers. Let's ship that part out.
Indeed.
Earlier you mentioned audits, and they're picking up as we come out of this pandemic. I'm expecting these to really accelerate. IBM and the other publishers are like, hey, we had 1 year without doing audits. We're going to make up for that lost time. If that's your belief, and you mentioned about preparing, how can organizations get in front of this? Because they know it's coming. I mean, you have to know it's coming.
Well, it's like many things. I suppose the pandemic has reminded everyone that you do need to be preparing for risks and that, these strange events are not so strange anymore. They are regular. The first thing I would say to anyone listening here is it's not if, but when. And you might have gotten a stay of execution, but the reviews haven't continued. They're standard. They should be treated as business as usual. They're an event that will occur across all your major vendors. The first thing I would probably recommend is right now, just do a vendor risk assessment. Just go down through your top 10, top 20 vendors and just ask yourself, what are the likelihoods of us getting audited? When was the last time we had a review? Have we made a major spend? Are we doing any major transformation within the business? Is there anything that, any reason that would particularly, we talk in the industry, if your particular sector or your country is getting the attention of a particular vendor. Do that piece of work. It's very easily done. For IBM, I would simply say, do a health check. Go, and it doesn't have to be deeply technical, although I recommend they do, and just find out what the situation is. Is it good? Is it bad? Or is it very ugly? At least then you can formulate a plan. But the idea of saying, oh, it'll be fine and not asking the question is just naive. And it's too expensive. It's just an area that if, in particular in IBM's place, getting that wrong is $1 million mistake. And you do not want to be leaving that to a junior operator in a data center who is tasked with just keeping systems going. And you're hoping that they will also manage essentially a multi-million-dollar asset. And that's unfair and shouldn't be. You should basically do the checking yourself. So that David thing, a risk assessment across your vendors, and then go in and do a health check with regard to IBM today. And yes, there'll be some, you might find some things you weren't expecting, but at least you have time now and can take a plan to resolve it.
Oh, yes, and you brought up something that if leadership does not take control and try to understand the decisions that have to be made, it may go down, and somebody that's you don't want to have to make that decision is now making those $1 million decisions on behalf of your organization.
You make a very good point, and I know it sounds kind of a little bit trivial of me to say, you know, a low-level operator in a data center can do that. They can, and it is
Yes.
not their fault because they're tasked with and being measured on uptime, continuity, keeping the business going. If someone comes screaming down the phone saying end of month accounts are not going to get out the door, throw some more cores at it. They will do it.
Yes.
It is, and they have done their job. It is further back up the chain that someone needs to understand. Hang on a minute. What are the implications of us trying to the business continuity? And I'm seeing that very much now, where, for example, you have an entire organization moving out of the office, and suddenly data centers are going to have to scale up rapidly, and the operations, the DevOps, and the ITSM people are going to be doing their job, which is deliver the service quickly and at the quality levels expected. But behind the scenes, the SAM functions and the CFOs need to be saying, hang on, we didn't get that for free. You know, we need to go back and actually understand what the bill is. And we might be getting away with it now, but that bill is going to arrive and it will have significant interest on it if it's left to be a reactive rather than a proactive thing.
Oh, yes, and people that don't realize if you get audited and you owe money, they're going to take that back years that you owe for. And that's how the bill, it gets the multiplication key on your calculator, not your addition key.
It can. And the other thing too that happens is in the rush to get the services up and running, shortcuts are taken. You know, where there was strict policy about maybe isolating all of the products on one cluster or in, you know, one server, or restricting the number of cores, which affects the license costs. In the rush to just get the service back up quick, we've got, you know, 1,000 staff who've just walked out the door and need to work immediately. Changes are made and the full implications are not fully appreciated. And that is most certainly where a baseline, a health check is required to see the dust is settled, the party's over, let's see what's broken and fix it. That's probably where I would say we leave this one.
I'm with you. And I just want to pile on one thing, especially in organizations that have outsourced some of their operations. Those leaders need to really dig in because there's unthought of risk that is because your outsourced partner is doing the best they can, but your licensing isn't their top of mind. They are being measured on SLAs, which could be a conflict with the licensing.
You make a very good point there. You can never outsource license risk.
Right.
The buck stops with the organization that bought it. And you're quite right there in that they are being measured right now on the metrics of delivering the service, uptime, continuity, and so forth, and performance. It is rare that you'll see within those that maybe down on, you know, the 7th page, one line says, oh, and please make sure we have licenses, is not being measured as a KPI, and that there is most certainly a problem accumulating in the background because they're too busy focusing on the foreground where the panic has been. Now would be the time to take a breath. As I said, the dust has settled, and if you aren't managing your estate, go out there and ensure that those who are have taken the time and can come in and show you the report and say, yes, we have checked across all the vendors, but specifically here for IBM, that we now understand the impact of all the changes have changed. And here's the bill, and not to be afraid to say, I'm sorry, but this is what it looks like, because the auditor will not be so shy when they're presenting the report.
Yes, and that's an ugly truth that it comes. If you're ever on the inside, on the client side, and you get audited, those are rough conversations. Piers, we thank you for your time. This has been great. It's been enlightening. How can the audience get in touch with you if they're needing these types of services specifically for IBM?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn is probably the easiest. I'm always very happy to connect with fellow SAM professionals, and you can always message me. If you just have a casual interest in IBM licensing, you can follow me on LinkedIn, where I post regularly. And of course, I have my personal blog, ibmlicenseexpert.com, where you can go subscribe and get some tips as well.
Oh yeah, it's all about rising the overall knowledge. Well, thank you for joining us for this brief breakout session. It's been a learning opportunity for me and hopefully for the rest of the audience. I hope you have a great day. Thank you, Piers.
Thank you.
Thank you.